All right. Here we go.
When I die, you better second life. When I die, you better second life. When the angels, when they meet me at the gate,
The Jazz Funeral. New Orleans, Dance with
so
Life and Death,
happy,
presented
so happy
by
to
the
see
wonderful
my
Annika
Savior's
Carter
face.
and myself,
Now
Mr.
when
The history of the jazz funeral is what can easily be defined as an experience, unlike anything we have ever experienced. It is a somber funeral that gradually transforms into a captivating and explosive performance made up of joyful sounds, energetic dances, and swaying marches, with the primary intention of honoring and celebrating the life of the deceased with known and even unknown members of the entire community.
To fully understand the jazz funeral, it is important to have a basic understanding of the underlying history of New Orleans during a time when there is truly little to celebrate. Once you understand the cause, it will be easier to understand the effect. Allow us to take a deeper dive into history.
The traditions displayed within the jazz funeral are deeply rooted from the Western African traditions that traveled with its people when the long journey was made to the United States of America. In 1719, the first documented slave ship arrived in New Orleans, Louisiana. This ship was filled with men, women, along with young boys and girls who had been forcefully kidnapped from their native country of Western Africa. They were inhumanely thrown into a new world where they were unable to speak or understand the language. They were actually treated worse than the animals that they shared the fields with. Imagine that. After many years and sometimes decades of this being considered the new normal, the only thing to look forward to for many within this population was death, which translated into a celebration of freedom. This is the birth of the jazz funeral.
In the 1800s, New Orleans was a cultural crossroads where African, French, Spanish, and Caribbean influences blended. Enslaved Africans brought rich musical traditions with heavy rhythm, call and response, and spiritual meaning. At the same time, French and Spanish colonists introduced brass bands, Catholic funeral rites, and military style processions. In places like Congo Square, African rhythms merged with European instruments and religious practices. Brass bands played solemn hymns on the way to the cemetery, then switched to lively, syncopated music on the return, celebrating the soul's journey to the afterlife. This blend of grief, faith, and joy evolved into the jazz funeral, a uniquely New Orleans tradition that honors both death and life.
By the early 20th century, jazz born from ragtime, blues, and brass band traditions brought improvisation, swing, and deeper emotion to funeral processions. Musicians like Buddy Bolden, known for his powerful cornet playing and free-form style, helped shift these events from structured marches to expressive performances. The music became more spontaneous and soulful, turning funerals into vibrant celebrations of life, not just somber farewells.
Built on the backs of their ancestors, and the stories passed down from generation to generation, a sense of pride and unity amongst community members provided an undeniable strength and endurance during the most difficult and troubling times. They placed their beliefs and trust in God and continued to foster a community of resilience and healing.
Funerals were known as a homegoing celebration. Although many slaves and future family members were born in the United States, this was never home. Death provided them an opportunity to return home to their Heavenly Father, where there would be no more pain or suffering. The funeral procession begins as a somber experience filled with sadness for the loss of the person who had passed over. Songs such as Amazing Grace, Precious Lord, and His Eye is on the Sparrow provided comfort and strength to the brokenhearted.
The second line is a defining feature of the jazz funeral, representing the heart and soul of New Orleans culture. Following the main procession, usually the family and brass band, the second line is made up of friends, neighbors, and even strangers who join in, dancing, waving parasols or handkerchiefs, and moving to the beat. It is spontaneous, inclusive, and deeply communal. What begins as a solemn occasion shifts into a joyful expression of resilience. The second line transforms grief into movement in music, celebrating the life of the departed while reaffirming the strength and unity of the living. It is both a tribute and a reminder that life, even in loss, continues with rhythm and spirit.
In jazz funerals, instruments like trumpets, tubas, and drums do more than play music. They guide the emotional journey of the procession. The slow, mournful sounds at the start express sorrow and respect for the deceased. As the funeral progresses, the music shifts, trumpets soar, drums pick up, and the tuba lays down a joyful groove, signaling a celebration of life and the soul's release. The powerful transition shows how music can carry people through grief and into healing. It has influenced modern funerals across cultures, encouraging the use of live music, not just for ceremony, but for emotional catharsis, giving mourners a way to feel process and ultimately honor the life that was lived.
After the Civil War, during Reconstruction and into the Jim Crow era, jazz funerals took on deeper meaning within the Black community. More than just a cultural tradition, they became a form of resistance and resilience in the face of systemic racism, segregation, and social oppression. By publicly claiming space with music, dance, and community unity, African Americans asserted their identity, their dignity, and the right to mourn and celebrate on their own terms. Jazz funerals defined the notion that Black grief or joy should be hidden or subdued. In doing so, they highlighted the broader struggle for civil rights and respect during a time of widespread inequality, using culture as a powerful form of expression and defiance.
The funerals of Louis Armstrong in 1971 and Mahalia Jackson in 1972 marked significant moments in the history of jazz funerals, elevating the tradition to national and global recognition. Louis Armstrong, a New Orleans native and jazz icon, was honored with the massive second line that drew crowds from all over. His funeral blended traditional jazz funeral elements with high profile public attention, symbolizing how deeply this local custom had influenced global music and culture. The joyful second line that followed his procession was a tribute not only to his legacy, but to the enduring spirit of New Orleans. Mahalia Jackson, known as the Queen of Gospel, was similarly honored with a powerful musical send off. Spirituals filled the service, celebrating her deep faith and musical impact. Her funeral showed how global and jazz traditions intertwined it in Black mourning practices, reinforcing the emotional and spiritual depth of these ceremonies. Together, their funerals highlighted the cultural significance and dignity of the jazz funeral, turning personal loss into a collective celebration and preserving its place in American history.
Jazz funerals demonstrated that funerals do not have to be somber or purely ritualistic. They can be vibrant, personal, and deeply communal. Through the fusion of music, dance, and collective participation, jazz funerals allowed families to express grief in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. This approach, where the community plays an active role in honoring the deceased, reshaped how funerals could be viewed, not just as a solemn ceremony, but as a celebration of life, legacy, and most importantly, culture. The influence of jazz funerals has extended beyond New Orleans, inspiring global funeral practices that focus on personalization, creativity, and emotional expression. The idea that funerals can be tailored to reflect the unique life and spirit of the deceased has become more widespread, with many funeral homes offering customizable services that incorporate music, storytelling, and other personal elements. This shift has encouraged the funeral industry to embrace client focused services and allowing families to design funerals that feel more like a reflection of their loved ones rather than a one size fits all event. Jazz funerals prove that ritual and creativity can coexist, and this philosophy has influenced how modern funerals are planned and experienced worldwide.
In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, jazz funerals evolved while staying rooted in tradition. By the 1980s, New Orleans musicians began blending funk with traditional jazz funeral elements. Bands like the Dirty Dozen Brass Band and Rebirth Brass Band added heavier bass lines, faster, and a modern groove, keeping the music relevant to new generations while continuing to honor the past. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, jazz funerals became powerful symbols of collective mourning and resilience. They were held not just for individuals, but for communities, lost neighborhoods, and a way of life. These post Katrina memorials honored the dead and voiced grief over the devastation while reaffirming New Orleans' cultural strength. The tradition continued to adapt, proving and providing that jazz funerals are not only about death, but about survival, unity, and the enduring soul of the city.
Today, rising costs, fewer traditional brass bands, and changing funeral practices pose challenges to jazz funeral traditions. However, young musicians, second home clubs, and cultural organizations are keeping it alive. They learn from elders, praise and honor the roots of the tradition. This reminds us that cultural rituals and funeral service are just about the past. They're about connection, identity, and healing. Preserving these practices while actively supporting and passing them on to the next generation, ensuring they remain a living, evolving part of our communities.
Jazz funerals teach us to mourn deeply by acknowledging the pain of loss, but they also show us how to celebrate fiercely by embracing the vibrancy of life. The tradition demonstrates that mourning is not just a private inward process. It can be communal and expressive where music, dance, and shared moments help to heal the emotional wounds of grief. The sorrow is tangible, but so is the joy. Life and death coexist, and both are honored with equal intensity. This legacy is important for funeral services, reminding us that funerals do not have to be solemnly somber or reserve, but instead they can reflect the full emotional depth of the deceased's life and the grieving process, encouraging personalization, expression, and community. By integrating joy with grief, jazz funerals offer a model for creating meaningful, human centered services. Beyond the funeral industry, this spirit of deeply mourning and fiercely celebrating is a reminder for humanity as a whole. It teaches us that while loss is inevitable, it does not define us. We can and we should honor those who have passed with the same energy and passion that they brought to life, celebrating their impact and the lives they touched, while allowing ourselves to experience the grief that comes with it. It is a powerful, lasting legacy of resilience and joy in the face of sorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.